If you stood in the center of London or Paris in the year 1350, the air would have smelled of wood smoke, mud, and rotting flesh. The Black Death had just finished its work, leaving a silence across the continent. Europe was a graveyard. It was a place of fear. Fear of God, fear of the king, and most of all, fear of the unknown. The map of the world was a small, flat parchment. If you sailed too far west, you fell off the edge. If you asked too many questions, you burned at the stake. But if you fast forward just 150 years, the smell has changed. Now the air smells of oil paint. It smells of fresh ink on paper. It smells of exotic spices, cinnamon, pepper, and tobacco. And underneath it all, the sharp, sulfurous smell of gunpowder. Something happened. It was as if the human species, after sleeping for 1,000 years, suddenly opened its eyes. The survivors of the plague looked at the empty chairs at their tables and realized that the old rules didn't matter anymore. The kings couldn't protect them. The priests couldn't save them. They stopped looking down at the dirt, waiting to die. They started looking up. They looked at the ruins of Rome and saw engineering miracles. They looked at the horizon and saw not an edge, but a doorway. They looked at the stars and saw a machine that they could understand. This era is called the Renaissance, the rebirth. But rebirth sounds too gentle. This wasn't a gentle awakening. It was a violent, chaotic explosion of genius and greed. In this episode, we are going to meet the men who broke the medieval world. We will watch a goldsmith in Germany invent a machine that became more dangerous than a nuclear bomb. We will walk the streets of Florence with a distracted genius named Leonardo, who was designing tanks while painting the most famous smile in history. We will board a leaking wooden ship with a madman named Christopher Columbus, who sailed straight into the abyss and accidentally crashed into a new universe.
We are about to leave the Middle Ages behind. The modern world, the world of science, capitalism, and global empire, starts right now. Before we talk about the art or the explorers, we have to talk about the technology that made it all possible. Imagine a world where copy and paste doesn't exist. For thousands of years, if you wanted a book, you couldn't buy it. You had to make it. To create a single copy of the Bible, a monk had to sit in a cold room for 3 years. He had to slaughter a flock of sheep to get enough parchment for the pages. He had to handwrite every single letter, every single word, by candlelight. Because books were so rare, they were worth more than houses. And because they were so expensive, knowledge was locked away. Kings controlled the laws because only they had the law books. Priests controlled the truth because only they could read the scripture. The average person lived in a fog of ignorance, relying on rumors and sermons. Enter Johannes Gutenberg. He wasn't a scholar. He was a goldsmith from Mainz, Germany. He was a businessman who was tired of losing money on bad investments. In the 1440s, he had an idea. He looked at the way coins were stamped with metal punches. He thought, what if I could stamp words like we stamp gold? He carved individual letters out of metal, A, B, C, that could be rearranged. He mixed a new kind of oil-based ink that would stick to the metal. He took a wine press, a machine used to crush grapes, and modified it to crush paper against ink. When he printed his first Bible in 1455, it was perfect. But the quality wasn't the revolution. The speed was. A monk could write a few pages a day. Gutenberg's press could print thousands. The explosion was immediate. In 1450, there were barely any books in Europe. By 1500, there were 20 million. It was the 15th century version of the internet. Suddenly, information couldn't be contained. If you had a dangerous idea, an idea that the king was corrupt or that the pope was wrong, you didn't need an army to spread it. You just needed a printer. The church tried to stop it. They tried to control what was printed, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a spoon. People began to learn to read, and once they could read, they began to question. Why does the Pope live in a golden palace when Jesus lived in poverty? Why do the stars move across the sky in patterns that don't match the church's charts? The printing press didn't just print books, it printed revolution. It prepared the mind of Europe for what was coming next. And the heart of this new mindset wasn't in Germany, it was in Italy.
If you walk through Florence today, it feels like a museum. But in the 1400s, it was a Shark Tank. Florence wasn't a kingdom, it was a republic run by merchants and bankers. And the biggest shark of them all was the Medici family. The Medicis were the godfathers of the Renaissance. They were originally doctors, that's what Medici means, but they became bankers. They managed the Pope's money. They were filthy rich, and they were ruthless. But the Medicis had a secret weapon. They didn't just buy land or armies, they bought genius. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as the Magnificent, believed that money was useless unless it created glory. He opened his home to poets, philosophers, and artists. He believed in a radical new philosophy called humanism. For centuries, the church had taught that humans were sinful, broken creatures, waiting for the afterlife. Humanism said, no, look at us. We are created in God's image. We are capable of greatness. We can understand the universe. But this beauty was born from blood. On Easter Sunday, 1478, the Medici's rivals, the Pazzi family, tried to wipe them out. In the middle of the cathedral, during High Mass, assassins pulled out daggers. They stabbed Lorenzo's brother, Giuliano, 19 times. Lorenzo barely escaped, bleeding from the neck, locking himself in the sacristy. The city of Florence didn't panic. They raged. They loved the Medicis. The mob hunted down the assassins and threw them out of the windows of the government palace. It was in this atmosphere of extreme violence and extreme beauty that the Renaissance artists grew up. They knew that life was short, so art had to be eternal. And two men stood above the rest. Two men who hated each other. The ultimate rivalry. Leonardo versus Michelangelo.
First, there was Leonardo da Vinci. He was the illegitimate son of a notary. He was handsome, charming, and easily distracted. He wore pink tunics and bought caged birds just to set them free. We know him as a painter, but he considered painting to be boring. On his job applications to dukes, he listed his skills. I can build bridges. I can design tanks. I can divert rivers. I can make cannons. And then at the very bottom, he added, also, I can paint. Leonardo was obsessed with nature. He didn't trust books. He trusted his eyes. He wanted to know how everything worked. Why is the sky blue? How does the heart pump blood? How does a bird fly? To find out, he became a grave robber. He dissected over 30 human corpses in the secret basements of hospitals. He peeled back the skin of the face to see the muscles underneath, just so he could paint the Mona Lisa's smile correctly. In his notebooks, written in a secret mirror code, he drew helicopters, submarines, and robots 500 years before they could be built. He was the mind of the Renaissance. Then there was Michelangelo. If Leonardo was the mind, Michelangelo was the soul. He was the opposite of Leonardo. He was grumpy, dirty, and intensely religious. He didn't care about science. He cared about God. He considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. He believed that the statue was already sleeping inside the marble. He just had to chip away the extra stone to set it free. When the Pope ordered him to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo tried to refuse. He said, I am not a painter. The Pope didn't care. So for 4 years, Michelangelo lay on his back on high scaffolding. Paint dripped into his eyes until he almost went blind. He worked in agony. But what he created changed art forever. When you look at the creation of Adam, you see God reaching out to man. But look closely. God is floating inside a shape. Anatomists today have analyzed that shape. It is a perfect cross-section of the human brain. Was it an accident? Or was Michelangelo telling us a secret? That God gave us the gift of intelligence, that the divine is in our minds. These men proved what humanism was all about. They showed that humans could create things that rivaled the gods. But while the Italians were conquering the canvas, the Spanish and Portuguese were trying to conquer the horizon.
Why did Europe suddenly decide to sail across the ocean?
It wasn't curiosity, it was desperation. For centuries, the Silk Road was the lifeline of the world. Spices, silk, and porcelain flowed from China and India into Europe. Spices weren't just for flavor. They were used to preserve meat and make medicine. They were worth their weight in gold. But in 1453, the door slammed shut. The Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople. The great Christian city fell. The Turks controlled the gateway between East and West, and they taxed the trade routes heavily. Europe was addicted to Asian goods, but the dealer had cut them off. The kings of Europe panicked. They needed a new route to India. They couldn't go east through the land, so the Portuguese decided to go south around the massive continent of Africa. But one man had a different idea, a simpler, crazier idea. Christopher Columbus. Columbus was an Italian sailor, a nobody, but he was a man possessed by a vision. He believed the world was smaller than everyone said it was. He did the math, badly. He calculated that Japan was only 3,000 miles west of Portugal. In reality, it was 12,000 miles away, and there were two giant continents in the way. He took his plan to the King of Portugal. The king's experts looked at his math and laughed. "You'll starve before you get halfway there," they said. They were right. He went to England. Rejection. He went to France. Rejection. Finally, he went to Spain. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella had just finished a war. They were broke. They needed gold. Columbus promised them mountains of it. They gave him 3 small leaking ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. In August 1492, he set sail into the Atlantic. We forget how terrifying this was. To the sailors, the Atlantic was the ocean of darkness. They believed in sea monsters. They believed the water boiled at the equator. Weeks passed. No land. The crew became restless. They whispered about mutiny. They planned to throw Columbus overboard and turn back. Columbus had to lie to them. He kept 2 logbooks, a real one with the actual distance, and a fake one to show the crew that they hadn't gone that far. On October 11th, the crew demanded they turn back. Columbus asked for just 3 more days. At 2 a.m. on October 12th, a lookout named Rodrigo saw moonlight reflecting off white sands. "Tierra! Tierra!" Columbus went ashore. He plunged the Spanish flag into the sand. He was greeted by the Taino people. They were peaceful, wearing gold ornaments. Columbus wrote in his diary, "They do not bear arms and do not know them. They would make fine servants." He thought he was in Asia. He called them Indians. He was wrong. He had found a new world. And for the people of that world, the apocalypse had just arrived.
This moment, 1492, is the single most important event in human history since the invention of agriculture. It is the moment the 2 halves of the planet, separated for 10,000 years, crashed into each other. Historians call it the Columbian Exchange. It sounds like a fair trade. It wasn't. Europeans brought technology. They brought steel swords that could cut through wooden shields. They brought arquebus guns that thundered like gods. They brought horses, beasts the Native Americans had never seen. To the Aztecs, a man riding a horse looked like a single, terrifying 2-headed monster. But the most powerful weapon the Europeans brought wasn't made of steel. It was biological. They brought smallpox, measles, influenza. The Europeans had lived with these diseases for centuries in filthy cities. They had immunity. The Native Americans did not. It was a slaughter. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés attacked the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, he didn't defeat them with just soldiers. He defeated them with sickness. Smallpox walked ahead of the army. It killed the emperor, it killed the generals, it killed 90% of the population. Villages were found empty, with skeletons lying in their hammocks. Entire civilizations collapsed, not because they were weak, but because they were sick. It is estimated that 50 million people in the Americas died within 100 years of Columbus. It was the greatest demographic catastrophe in human history. But the exchange went both ways. While death went west, life went east. The Americas gave the Old World gifts that would save Europe from starvation. Imagine Italian food without tomatoes. Imagine Thai food without chili peppers. Imagine Swiss chocolate without cocoa.
None of these existed in Europe, Asia, or Africa before 1492. The most important gift was the humble potato. Europeans were suspicious of it at first. It looked like a dirty rock. The church said it wasn't in the Bible. But the potato was a miracle crop. It grew underground, safe from hailstorms and soldiers. It was packed with calories. With the potato, Europe stopped starving. Populations exploded. The labor force grew. This surplus of people would eventually fuel the Industrial Revolution. So, in a dark irony, the crops of the New World fed the empires that destroyed it. And to harvest these new crops, sugar, tobacco, cotton, the Europeans needed labor. The natives were dying. So, they looked to Africa. The transatlantic slave trade began. The ocean became a highway for misery, transporting millions of kidnapped Africans to build the new global economy. The modern world was being built on a foundation of sugar, silver, and slavery.
While the map of the earth was being redrawn by sailors, the map of the heavens was being redrawn by mathematicians. For 1,500 years, everyone knew the earth was the center of the universe. Aristotle said it. The Bible seemed to say it. It felt true. The ground feels still, and the sun moves across the sky. Humans liked this idea. It meant we were special. We were the center of God's attention. But a Polish priest named Nicolaus Copernicus had a nagging doubt. The math didn't work. The movement of the planets was too messy. He realized that if you put the sun in the center and made the earth spin around it, the math became simple, beautiful. But he was terrified. To say the earth moved was to contradict the Bible. It was heresy. He waited until he was on his deathbed to publish his book. But you can't kill an idea. In 1609, an Italian scientist named Galileo Galilei heard about a new Dutch invention, a spyglass used by sailors. Galileo improved it. He didn't look at ships, he looked at the sky. He was the first human being to see the universe as it really is. He looked at the moon. The church taught that heavenly bodies were perfect, smooth spheres. Galileo saw mountains, craters, and valleys. It was a rock, just like Earth. He looked at Jupiter. He saw 4 tiny stars dancing around it, moons. If moons orbited Jupiter, then not everything orbited the Earth. The crystal spheres of the ancients were shattered. Galileo published his findings in a book called The Starry Messenger. It was a bestseller. But the church was not amused. The Inquisition summoned him to Rome. They showed him the instruments of torture. They told him to recant. Galileo was an old man. He was scared. He knelt before the cardinals and read a statement admitting that he was wrong, that the earth did not move. But legend says, as he stood up and walked away, he muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. He was right. Truth does not depend on authority. Truth depends on evidence. This was the birth of the scientific revolution. Humanity was graduating. We were no longer children believing what we were told. We were becoming adults, finding out for ourselves.
By the year 1600, the world had changed so much that a time traveler from 1400 would think he was on a different planet. The silence of the Middle Ages was gone. The world was loud. It was filled with the clanking of printing presses, the roar of cannons, and the shouts of sailors discovering new continents. The earth was round. It was no longer the center of the universe. Europe, once a muddy backwater, was becoming the master of the globe, armed with science and stolen gold. The awakening was complete. Humanity had unlocked the secrets of the atom and the stars. But with this new power came new questions. If we can understand the laws of gravity, why do we need kings to tell us the laws of men? If all humans are created equal in the eyes of God, why are some born masters and others slaves? The mind was free, but the body was still in chains. The next chapter of history wouldn't be fought with paintbrushes or telescopes. It would be fought with guillotines and muskets. The age of discovery is over. The age of revolution
is about to begin. We will see a king lose his head in France. We will see a tea party in Boston. And we will see a little corporal named Napoleon try to conquer the world. History is just getting started.